Tough dad's kids. When'd you see a side of him no one else did? My dad wasn't someone you messed with. He was 6 feet 2 inches, hands like mitts, and a stare that made you confess. He ran a landscaping business, barking orders like a sergeant. At home, he wasn't much different. Rules were ironclad. Home by 9, dishes done, no backtalk. My friends called him the general, half joking, half scared. I'm Noah, 16, stuck with his boot camp vibe, with mom and my little brother Leo, who's 10 and already better at staying on dad's good side. I always wondered if he was more than just a tough guy. Some part of him was locked away. Got my answer last summer, but it cost me. It started with a fight that shook our house. Growing up felt like living in a pressure cooker. He wasn't cruel, just relentless. Brought home a C, he'd lecture me about my future. Missed soccer practice, he'd make me run laps till my legs burned. Life's no free ride, Noah, he'd say, his voice gravelly. Mom would smooth things over, saying he just wanted us to succeed. But it felt like he trained us for a war we didn't join. Sam, being younger, got off easier. Even he knew to keep his head down when dad was mad. Didn't hate him, but I wanted a normal moment. Maybe crack a joke or say he's proud, no strings attached. Deep down, I wondered if he even liked us, or if we were just his job. The summer I turned 16, things were tense. I'd been working part-time at Dad's business, hauling mulch and trimming hedges. It was tough. Dad didn't cut me any slack. You're not here to goof off. He'd snap if my break was long. I was saving for a used car, dreaming of freedom, but every paycheck felt like a drop in the bucket. At home, Dad was edgy because his business struggled. A big client bailed, and he scrambled to cover payroll. Mom tried to cheer him, but he'd grunt, then tinker in the garage. Leo and I tiptoed, knowing one wrong move could set him off. It all came to a head one muggy late July evening. Dinner was quiet, just forks clinking and Mom's nervous garden talk. Leo was rambling about a science project, building a rocket, when Dad cut him off. Eat, don't yap, he said, not looking up. Leo shrank, and my jaw tightened. I was sick of the silence. Sick of Dad treating us like workers. Before I stopped myself, I muttered, maybe he'd talk less if you didn't shut him down. Froze. Mom's fork hung, and Leo's eyes went wide. Dad's head snapped up, staring at me. What'd you say? He asked, his voice low. I knew I should back down, but something in me snapped. I said, you're always on us. I shot back. Leo was just excited. You act like it's a crime. You treat us like we're failing you daily. Mom gasped. Noah, honey, let's not. But Dad raised a hand, stopping her. He leaned in, knuckles white on his glass. You think you can talk to me like that in my house after all I do? Everything you do? I laughed, bitter. You mean working us like dogs? Act like we're never good enough? I'm busting my butt for your business and I just get grief. My voice shook and Leo stared, but I couldn't stop. Dad stood, towering over the table. You're out of line, Noah. You don't know what it takes to keep this family. Maybe I'd know if you ever talk to us. I yelled, standing too. You're not a dad. You're a boss. The words hung there, and for a second I thought he might hit me. Instead, he pointed to the door. Get out. I didn't think. I grabbed my shoes and stormed out, slamming the door hard. The night air was thick, crickets chirping like normal. Walked down our street, heart pounding, replaying the fight. Part of me felt free, like I'd finally said what I held in. But another part was terrified. What if Dad never let me back? What if I just burned my whole family? I ended up at the park, on a bench by the empty baseball field. My phone buzzed. Mom texted, please come home, Noah. He didn't mean it. I didn't reply. Wasn't ready to face him. I sat for hours, watching stars, trying to figure out why Dad was hard. I remembered Mom's stories about his childhood, his dad walking out, leaving his mom to raise 3 boys alone. Dad worked young, dropped out of school to pay bills. Maybe that's why he pushed us hard, I thought. But it didn't excuse treating us like we're never enough. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. My stomach twisted, expecting a cop to tell me to move. Instead, it was Dad. His work jacket slung, looking tired, not mad, just worn out. He didn't say anything, just sat a few feet away. I braced for a lecture, but he just stared at the field, hands clasped. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than ever. You know, I used to play ball here. Shortstop. Wasn't half bad. I blinked, surprised. Dad never talked about his past. Not like that. Why'd you stop? I asked, careful. He shrugged, a small, sad smile on his face. Life got in the way. Had to grow up fast. He paused, then added, didn't want that for you and Leo. That's why I pushed you. Maybe I pushed too hard. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the dad I knew, the one who kicked me out. He sounded almost sorry, but I was still mad, still hurt. You didn't just push, I said, voice tight. You made us feel like we're failing you, like we're not your kids, just projects. He flinched a little, and something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He just nodded like he was taking it in. Come home, Noah, he said quietly. We'll talk more tomorrow. I followed him back, not to forgive, but too tired to fight. The walk was silent, but not the usual tense kind. It was like we were both trying to figure out what's next. At home, Mom hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, and Leo peeked, whispering, you okay? I nodded, but my head was spinning. Dad showed me a crack in his armor, a glimpse of someone who wasn't just the general, but I didn't know what to do, or if it'd last. The morning after our fight, I woke up expecting the house to feel like a battlefield. I'd yelled at Dad, called him out, and he'd shown up at the park, not to drag me home, but to talk. That soft-spoken guy who mentioned shortstop wasn't the dad I knew. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Part of me wanted to believe he meant it. He'd ease up, but another part braced for him to snap back to the general, barking orders like normal. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if last night was a fluke or a start of something new. Downstairs, the kitchen was quieter than usual. Mom flipped pancakes, her cheer dialed down, and Leo doodled, sneaking glances like I was a bomb. Dad was at the table sipping coffee, work boots on. I hesitated, half expecting a lecture on respect. Instead, he looked up, just a quick nod. Morning, Noah, he said, voice neutral, like we hadn't screamed 12 hours ago. I mumbled morning back, slid into my chair, grabbed a pancake. Mom smiled, but the air was thick. Everyone waited for someone else to move first. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Got a job today at the community center, he said, not looking at us. They need the garden redone. Could use an extra hand. He paused, then added, Noah, you in? I froze. Fork halfway to my mouth. Dad never asked me to work. He just told me. After last night, I figured he'd want me far away. Leo's eyes widened. Mom's brows shot up, but I kept my face blank. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual, heart racing. Was this his way of making up, or a trap? The community center was a rundown brick building a few miles away, with a patchy lawn and an untouched garden. Dad's crew was already there unloading shovels and soil bags. I'd worked with him before, but today felt different. Dad didn't bark at me or criticize my technique. He just handed me a rake, said, start by the fence. I nodded, waiting for the catch, but he turned, talking to his foreman, Frank, about drainage. I started raking dead leaves and pulling weeds. My mind was spinning. Was this his peace offering, or was he just too tired to fight? As morning went on, I kept glancing at Dad. He was in his element, directing the crew with that voice, but wasn't as harsh. He even laughed when Frank tripped. A low chuckle I barely knew. Around noon, a woman from the center came out, Miss Chen, who ran programs. She was short, no nonsense, but her smile was warm. This looks amazing, Mike, she said to Dad. The kids will love it. Dad shrugged, wiping sweat off his forehead. Just doing our job, he said, but I caught a flicker of pride in his eyes. Ms. Chen turned to me, her smile widening. You must be Noah. Your dad says you're a hard worker. I nearly dropped my rake. Dad said that? Thanks, face burning, and glanced at him, but he adjusted a wheelbarrow, pretending not to hear. Ms. Chen kept talking, saying the garden would be a safe space for kids, a place to plant veggies and learn nature. Means a lot to have volunteers like you, she added. I realized she thought I was here by choice, not because Dad dragged me. Didn't correct her, but the idea Dad bragged about me stuck. We broke for lunch, sitting on Dad's truck tailgate. The crew joked, but Dad was quieter, eating his sandwich, staring at the garden. I sat next to him, picking at my chips, trying to speak up. Finally, I went for it. This place is kind of cool, I said, keeping it light. Better than hauling mulch for rich folks' lawns. He snorted. That might have been a laugh. Yeah, well, this one's free, he said. Ria's been after me for months. Said the kids deserve something. Nice. I raised an eyebrow. Dad, doing free work? That was new. Why'd you say yes? I asked, curious. He didn't answer right away. He drank some water, then said, grew up around here. This center was all I had some days. Kept me out of trouble. His voice was low, like he shared something he kept in. I waited, hoping he'd keep going, and he did. My brothers and I, we'd come here after school. Mom was working. Dad was gone. They had this old basketball court out back. He'd shoot hoops till dark. He paused, eyes distant. Place was a dump, but it was ours. I stared at him, trying to picture it. Dad, as a kid, not much older than Leo, dribbling a basketball on a cracked court. He'd never talked about his childhood like this, not in detail. Mom mentioned his dad leaving, but Dad brushed it off like it didn't matter. Now hearing him talk about the center, I saw a glimpse of someone else. Someone who'd been a kid with dreams, not just the guy who ran our house like a base. Didn't know you played ball? I said, keeping my tone even, not wanting to scare him. He shrugged, a small smile on his face. Wasn't bad. Too short for varsity, though. I laughed, and for a second it felt like two guys talking, not father and son about to fight. But Frank called him to check measurements, and the moment was gone. I went back to work, my head buzzing. Dad opened up a little, and it was messing. I wanted to believe he was trying. Years of tough act made me wary. What if this was a one-off, and tomorrow he'd be yelling again? The afternoon got busier. Ms. Chen brought out kids from the summer program, which meant them running around, tossing dirt, asking a million questions. One kid, a skinny boy named Sam, maybe 8, latched onto me, following me like a shadow. You're strong, he said, watching me haul soil. Bet you could lift a car? I grinned, flexing a little. Maybe a small one. Sam laughed, then pointed at Dad, who was showing another kid how to plant a seedling. Is that your dad? He's scary. I glanced over. Dad was crouched, his big hands patting dirt round a tiny plant, his face focused but not stern. Yeah, I said, but he's not so bad. Seeing Dad with those kids was weird. He wasn't barking orders or snapping at him for messing up. He was patient, explaining how deep to dig, even laughing when a girl got mud on his jeans. Sam kept talking, telling me how he came to the center daily because his mom worked late. Mrs. Chen is nice, but I wish we had a real garden, he said. My grandma grew tomatoes. I nodded, thinking about what Dad said, how this place was his lifeline. Maybe that's why he was here, giving back something he'd lost. By the time we wrapped up, the sun set and the garden took shape. Neat soil rows, a few seedlings, and a clear spot for a bench. Mrs. Chen thanked us, her eyes shining like we'd given her the moon. Dad just nodded, but I could tell he was pleased. On the drive home, I waited for him to clear the air, but he didn't. Instead, he turned on the radio, some old rock song I didn't know, and he tapped fingers on the wheel. It was the most relaxed I'd seen him in months. When we pulled into the driveway, Mom waited on the porch. Leo kicked a soccer ball nearby. How'd it go? She asked, voice cautious. Fine, Dad said, then looked at me. Noah did good. My jaw nearly hit the ground. A compliment from Dad, no strings attached. Mom smiled, and Leo ran over, asking if I saw cool tools. I ruffled his hair, still processing. Dad went inside. Before he did, he turned back. We're back there tomorrow, he said. You coming? It wasn't a command, more like a question. I nodded. Yeah, I'm in. That night, I lay in bed, replaying the day. Dad at the center, talking his childhood, laughing with those kids. It was like meeting a stranger with my dad's face. But I wasn't naive. One day didn't erase years of him being hard, making me feel never enough. Still, something shifted, like a door cracking open. Didn't know if he'd keep it open or if I'd dare walk through. All I knew was, for the first time, I wanted to try. Next few days at the center felt like a parallel universe. Dad was still gruff, focused, quick to call out slackers, but there was a softer undercurrent. After our fight and that night at the park, I'd seen a crack in his armor. Working on the garden with him widened. He wasn't suddenly warm, but he was different. Less the general, more a guy trying to meet me halfway. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to snap back, but daily at the center chipped away at my doubts, and I saw pieces of a man I'd never known. We were at the center every morning that week, transforming the garden bit by bit. The crew hauled new soil, laid gravel paths, and built raised beds for veggies. I was on seedling duty, planting tomatoes and peppers under Miss Chen's eye. Summer program kids were always around, making it chaotic but kind of fun. Sam, the 8-year-old who called Dad scary, was my sidekick, chattering about superheroes and his grandma's cooking. "You think these tomatoes will be as good as hers?" he asked, poking the soil. "Better?" I said, grinning. "We're pros." He laughed, and I caught Dad watching us from across the garden, a small nod on his face. That nod stuck with me. Dad didn't praise often. When he did, it was usually backhanded, like, "Not bad, but faster." But lately, he'd been different. Day before, I fixed a wobbly trellis without asking. He clapped my shoulder. "Good thinking, Noah." No lecture, no critique, just a compliment. It was small, but hit me hard. I'd spent years chasing his approval. Now it came with no strings. I didn't know how to handle it. Part of me wanted to lean in, but another part was scared it wouldn't last. The center wasn't just changing how I saw Dad. It showed me a side of him the crew didn't know. One afternoon, Mrs. Chen pulled him aside to talk about adding a small fountain. Something about it being calm for the kids. I was nearby stacking mulch, close enough to overhear. "You're doing more than we expected, Mike," she said. "This place hasn't looked this good since I was a kid." Dad shrugged, his usual, but this time his voice was low. "Just glad it's helping," he said. Mrs. Chen smiled. "It's personal for you, right?" Dad hesitated, then said, "Yeah. Owe this place a lot." I froze, hands still on the mulch bag. He'd hinted at his connection before, but hearing him admit it felt different, like he was letting her in on a secret. I wanted to ask more, but the moment passed. He was back to directing the crew. Still, his words lingered. That evening, driving home, I took a chance. "You said you owe the center," I started, eyes on the dash. "What do you mean?" He gripped the wheel tighter, and for a second I thought he'd shut me down, but then he sighed. "When I was a kid, things were rough," he said. "Mom worked 2 jobs. My brothers and I were on our own a lot. This place, back when it was just a rec room and a busted court, it gave us somewhere to go, kept us from running wild." He glanced at me, his eyes softer than usual. "Ms. Chen was a counselor then. She didn't let me quit." I blinked, trying to picture it. Dad, my tough dad, as a scrappy kid needing someone like Ms. Chen to keep him in line. It was hard to wrap my head around. "You never told us that," I said, voice quiet. He snorted a half laugh. "Not exactly a bedtime story, Noah." But Frank didn't sound mad, just tired, like that memory was heavier than he let on. I wanted to ask what else he hid, but I figured I should let it go. For now, it was enough. At home, things were still kinda off. Sarah was thrilled. Frank and I got along, but she kept watching like we'd blow up again. Sam was normal, doing homework and begging to play games. But even he noticed the change. "Frank's not yelling much," he said one night, sprawled on the couch. "It's weird." I laughed, ruffled his hair. "Yeah, weird's one word, but it wasn't just weird, it was hope, and that scared me. Hope made you weak, and I wasn't sure I could trust Frank's new side." Next day at the center, things got intense. The paving stones were late, and the crew rushed to finish paths before Miss Davis's big event. Frank was full foreman, but wasn't snapping, just moving fast, checking stuff and helping lift. I was hauling stones with Mike the foreman when he leaned over and said, "Your old man's different this week. You do something to him?" I shrugged, wasn't sure how to answer. "Maybe he's just in a good mood." Mike laughed. "Frank, good mood? That's a first." But Mike was right. Frank was different. When a younger guy dropped a stone and cracked it, I expected him to lose it. Instead, he just said, "It happens. Grab another." He looked as shocked as I felt. Later, when Kai and other kids got underfoot trying to carry tiny pebbles, Frank didn't shoo them away. He crouched, showing them how to place the stones right. His voice was patient, almost gentle. "See?" he said, guiding Kai's hands. "Gotta make it sturdy." Kai beamed, and I felt a pang in my chest. This was the dad I wanted, but seeing him like this with other kids made me jealous and proud. That afternoon, Miss Davis brought out lemonade, and kids ran around laughing and splashing. Frank and I sat on a bench, catching our breath. He was quiet, watching the chaos with a faint smile. "Reminds me of old days," he said, almost to himself. "You and your brothers?" I asked, sipping lemonade. He nodded. "Yeah, we'd make a mess. Drive counselors nuts, but they never kicked us out." He paused, then added, "Made me think I could be somebody. You know, not just some screw-up." His words hit me hard. Frank, a screw-up? The guy who ran a business, fed our family, never missed a bill. It didn't add up. "You're not a screw-up," I said, words slipping out. He looked at me, surprised, then gave a small laugh. "Thanks, kid. But I came close." He didn't explain, and I didn't push. But that moment, with lemonade and kids laughing, felt like we'd never been closer. By Friday, the garden was almost done. Beds were planted, paths set, and Miss Davis buzzed about the event, a ribbon cutting with food and music. She kept thanking Frank, who just waved her off, but I could tell he was proud. That night, as we cleaned, Kai ran up to me, holding a tiny tomato plant. "Miss Davis said I could give this to you," he said, giving it to me, "for being awesome." I laughed, ruffled his hair. "You're pretty awesome, too." Frank was nearby, coiling a hose. He glanced over, eyes crinkling. "Better take care of that," he said. "Kai's counting on you." Driving home, I held the plant, feeling protective of it. Frank hummed along to the radio, some old song about rambling men, and for once, the silence wasn't heavy. I wanted to tell him I was glad we were doing this, but the words felt too big. Instead, I said, "Kai's a good kid." Frank nodded. "Yeah, reminds me of you at that age. Always curious." I stared at him. him, my throat tight. Was that a compliment? A memory? Whatever it was, it felt like a gift. When we got home, Sarah had dinner ready. Spaghetti, Sam's favorite, and the house felt warmer. Like last week's tension was fading. Sam was talking fast about his rocket project, and Frank actually listened, asking questions instead of shutting him down. Sarah caught my eye, her smile saying she saw it too. After dinner, I put Kai's plant on my windowsill, promising I'd keep it alive. Lying in bed, I thought about Frank, the kid he'd been, the man he was becoming. He was still tough, still hard-edged, but there was more to him. Layers I was just starting to get. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, I wasn't scared to find out. The center's garden was done. The ribbon cutting was tomorrow. I'd spent the week working with Frank, seeing glimpses of a man I barely knew. Someone who laughed with kids, shared his past, and even complimented me without a lecture. It was like our fight, the one that sent me storming to the park, had cracked something in, but I wasn't naive. Frank was still the guy who ruled our house, who made me feel I was never enough. As we headed into the weekend, I wondered if this new side would stick or vanish once the project was over. What I didn't expect was the next few days would show me more of Frank than ever, making me decide what kind of son I'd be. Saturday morning was chaos. The center buzzed with volunteers, setting tables, stringing lights, and bringing in food trays. Ms. Davis was everywhere, directing traffic with a megaphone and a grin, while kids ran around, half helping, half making a mess. Frank's crew was there, finishing the garden, smoothing paths, watering plants, and setting up a wooden bench they built. I was hanging signs for the new garden, my hands sticky with tape and sweat. Every time I glanced at Frank, he was moving, carrying tools or talking to Ms. Davis, focused but not tense. He looked happy in a way I wasn't used to. Kai, my little shadow, found me struggling with a crooked sign. "Alex, you coming to the party?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "Gonna have cake?" I laughed, adjusting the sign. "Wouldn't miss it, bud. You gonna save me a piece?" He nodded solemnly like a sacred vow, then darted off to chase a butterfly. I watched him go, feeling a mix of pride and protectiveness. Kai reminded me of Sam, full of energy, desperate for someone to notice him. It made me think of Frank, how he'd been with Kai all week, patient and kind in a way he rarely was with us. Why was it easier for him to show that side to strangers? The event kicked off at noon with music blasting and a crowd of neighbors, kids, and local bigwigs. Miss Davis gave a speech, thanking everyone, but especially Frank and his crew. "Frank Harper's given us more than a garden," she said, her voice cracking a little. "He's given our kids a place to grow." The crowd clapped and I saw Frank shift, hands in his pockets. He wasn't big on attention, but I could tell he was moved. When Mrs. Davis called him up to cut the ribbon, he tried to wave her off, but she insisted. I took a picture with my phone. Frank, scissors in hand, looking awkward but proud. It was the first time I'd thought to snap him like that. After the ribbon was cut, the garden was open. Kids swarmed in, touching plants, running paths, and climbing the bench. Kai grabbed my hand, dragging me to show off his tomato plants, the ones we planted. "They're growing already," he said, pointing at tiny green shoots. I grinned, kneeling for a better look. "You're a natural, Kai." He beamed, then ran off to join his friends. I stood up, dusting my jeans, and saw Frank watching me again, his expression soft. "You're good with him," he said, walking over. "He looks up to you." I shrugged, embarrassed. "He's easy to like." Frank nodded, then added, "You're easy to like too, Alex." My breath caught. Was that affection from Frank? I mumbled thanks, my face hot, and he clapped my shoulder before helping Mike with cleanup. The rest of the day was a blur, eating barbecue, playing games with kids, and dodging Sam, who'd shown up with Sarah and wanted a water balloon fight. Sarah was in her element, chatting with neighbors and sneaking cookies to Kai and his friends. Frank stayed busy, but I noticed him slowing, taking time to talk, even laughing when Miss Davis teased him about his fancy garden. It was surreal seeing him like this, part of a community, not just the guy who barked orders at home. I kept thinking about what he'd said, about owing the center, about being a kid who needed a place like this. It made me wonder what else I didn't know about him. As the sun set, the event wound down, and most of the crowd left. I was stacking chairs when Miss Davis pulled me aside. "Alex, I need a favor," she said, her eyes serious. "There's a kid here, Ben, who's come to the center for years. He's 14. Good kid, but he's struggling. Could use someone to talk to. Maybe show him the ropes with the garden." I hesitated. I wasn't a counselor, just a high school, but her face was so earnest. And I thought about Kai, how much he looked up to me. "Sure," I said. "I can try." She smiled, relieved. "Your dad said you'd be great. He's proud of you, you know." My stomach flipped. Frank, proud. He'd never said it outright. Not like that. I nodded, too stunned to reply, and went back to stacking chairs, my head spinning. That night back home, the house felt different, warmer, like the air wasn't so heavy. Sarah was humming in the kitchen. Sam was sprawled on the couch, and Frank was in the garage tinkering. I went out to see him, something I hadn't done in years. He was cleaning his tools. The radio played an old country song. I leaned against the workbench, watching him work. "Today was cool," I said, testing the waters. He glanced up, nodding. "Yeah, Miss Davis runs a good show." I took a breath, then went for it. "You didn't have to do all that, you know, the garden for free. Why'd you care so much?" He set down his rag, his hands still for once. "Told you I owed that place," he said, his voice low. "But it's more than that. Those kids, Kai, Ben, the rest, they're like I was. No dad." Sarah stretched thin. "I didn't have anyone to show me how to be a man. Had to figure it out the hard way." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "Don't want that for you or Sam or them." I swallowed, my throat tight. This was the most he'd ever opened up, and it wasn't just about the center. It was about us. "You're doing okay with us," I said, words clumsy but honest. He gave a small smile, the kind that didn't need words, and went back to his tools. Next morning, I woke up early, Kai's tomato plant still thriving on my windowsill. I decided to head back to the center, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Ben was there, a lanky kid with a guarded look, kicking a soccer ball against the wall. I introduced myself, feeling awkward, but he nodded, and we ended up planting more seedlings. He didn't say much, but when I showed him how to space plants, he listened, his hands copying mine. It felt good, like I was passing on something Frank taught me, even if he didn't mean to. Frank showed up later, dropping off extra tools Ms. Davis asked for. He saw me with Ben and didn't say anything, just gave me that nod again. The one that said more than words. I realized then this was who he was. Not just the tough guy, but the man who fought to be better than his dad, who built a garden for kids he didn't know, who was trying to be there for me. I wasn't sure what was next. School was starting soon, and Frank's business was shaky, but for the first time, I felt we were on the same team. Back home, Sam was working on his rocket, and I helped glue fins, laughing when he got glitter all over. Sarah watched us, her eyes soft, and when Frank came in, he didn't snap at Sam for the mess. Instead, he sat down, asking, "That thing gonna fly?" Sam lit up, explaining his design, and Frank listened, really listened. I caught Sarah's eye, and she smiled like she knew we were all finding our way. As I headed to bed, I looked at Kai's plant, its leaves catching moonlight. It was small, fragile, but growing.